Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Verizon 5G Lab and the Global Sports Venture Studio, I am pleased to welcome you to Performance at the Speed of Sport. Today we're going to be talking about the changing role of technology in sport, both on the field and off, accelerated by technologies like 5G and mobile edge compute. I am Kyle Bunch. I am the managing director of the Global Sports Venture Studio, which is a partnership between RGA and the Los Angeles Dodgers, as well as a host of other sports organizations, some of whom I have with me here today, including LAFC and Verizon. With me as well, I have Kim Popp, the Director of Sports Science and Performance Analytics at BreakAway Data. Thank you, Kim, for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about BreakAway real quick?
Thanks for having me. BreakAway is an athlete data company, and we work with teams and leagues to better understand their performance data.
Well, we're excited to talk more about that today. We also have Masa Cabayano with me from Uplift Labs. Tell us a little bit about Uplift, and we'll talk about some of the things today that you're working on with the team here.
First of all, excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Really cool space.
Yeah.
And yeah, at Uplift, we're all about democratizing the best of sports science and sports medicine, so an athlete at any skill level can improve their performance and while minimizing injuries, and to do it just with the phones we carry in our back pockets.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being here. And next we have Christian Lau. Very excited to welcome Christian Lau, the Chief Technology Officer, Head of Technology at Los Angeles Football Club. Christian, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and it's great to see you in the 3 dimensions.
I know. It's all these people that we've worked with for so long, now all sharing a space. It's pretty exciting. Last but not least, our host effectively today, Brian Meekum and from Verizon. Brian, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having us.
Yep.
And excited to hear from you. Just talk briefly for the audience as we get going about your role and all of the different things that you and your team get into at Verizon.
All righty, well thanks Kyle. Thanks everybody too for introducing yourselves. It's great to have you here. You can see back there we're at the 5G Sports Center. It's kind of a monumental big day for us. We are launching this and opening it up, and we're excited to bring in partners. We're excited to be here for what we've been working on at Verizon for a while now. So we realized the value and the speed of 5G, the low latency. We realized what incredible technology it was going to be, and then we also married that up with the mobile edge compute, what we call MEC. So you'll hear MEC a lot today, and the MEC is so exciting because I think you're going to hear from some of the partners here today. You just couldn't do before what we can do now, and so we're going to talk about some of the art of what's possible and actually show you some of the things that we're doing currently with some professional sports teams. So I'm just excited to be here, excited to host you guys. It's going to be a good conversation today. My role at Verizon is I'm the Vice President of Device Technology and Connected Objects. I'm also the sports exec sponsor, and what my role is to make sure that we're figuring out how to bring sports analytics and technology together to make sports better, to help athletes, to prevent injury, to make people so that they can perform better. It's a very exciting space to be in, so I think it's cool we're all here together.
Right now is such an exciting time in terms of all of these technologies that we've talked about for a long time, really starting to roll out at scale, and so really excited to get into talking about what that means. I think you touched on it a little bit of where we are today here at the Verizon 5G Sports Center as part of this partnership that the Global Sports Venture Studios established. I'd love to talk about a real practical example that's very timely and relevant right now as we watch the NBA playoffs. Your relationship with the Phoenix Suns and some of the things that you're doing with the 5G Performance Center out there in Phoenix.
Yeah, so I can't wait to tell everybody about that. So tonight, right over here at the Staples Center, the Phoenix Suns, who they improved their season by 18 plus wins. They are in the playoffs for the first time in 11 years. I mean, go Suns, right? I mean, I know we're in LA land, but the Suns are a great partner of Verizon. We came up with an idea a couple years ago. I want to tell you about this for a minute, so we'll take a little journey. We decided that we wanted to vertically integrate or stack up some of the great tech that's out there married to what I referenced earlier, this new 5G capability with mobile edge compute. And in marrying that together, we put in some companies, and by the way, we have them all here and more so that we can do more innovation here and continue that path here with academia, with sports, trying to make sure that we continue the path. But what we did with the NBA Suns is we got together and said, what is it you're looking for, and how can this new edge computing with this really fast processing and fast communication ability over 5G help your team? And the Sun said, well, we want to understand better what our players are doing in practice. We want to understand better their load management. We want to understand their performance as a team, what's happening with the ball, their effectiveness, and what's happening with the defense against them. And so we sat back and we looked at a bunch of different companies. We brought them together. We married them up in something called the 5G Performance Center. It's totally awesome. And when you go there, the team there and the general manager are so excited. They've actually given us attribution and said, we probably wouldn't be in the playoffs if we didn't have this tech. And so every day when they go in, their players are experiencing a different kind of feedback system from the coaches and a different kind of feedback. It's not just human interpretation, but computer interpretation and edge compute, and it's all happening very fast. And so the 5G Performance Center was an opportunity for us to demonstrate when you take our great 5G and our edge compute and then you stack it up with different sports startups where they have that tech and they can try and improve and give feedback they couldn't do before because they just didn't have that edge compute. So very exciting.
I remember hearing one of the examples as we started working together as the space was being launched, and the idea of different technologies where a guy like Devin Booker could walk in at 3 a.m., start shooting around, the cameras, the sensors, the technology there is smart enough to know it's him, to know exactly what's going on.
And real-time feedback, they can tell him about his shot, if the arc is off, if he hit too far left or right on the rim. I mean, where do you get that, right? That just doesn't exist prior to us doing all this work now.
Thinking about that, you talked a bit about that sort of intersection between the startup angle and the pro club angle. Masa, Christian, I know you guys are working on some things together through LAFC and Uplift. Masa, maybe if you want to talk about, you guys want to talk a little bit about how you're thinking about your technology, and maybe up front would be good to hear a bit about the solution that you've been building at Uplift and how that's evolved, and then how you're kind of bringing that to bear with a club like LAFC.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of that track to democratize, we believed it was very important to work at the elite level. So these are professional teams, professional leagues, professional coaches and athletes. And we built a product that just uses 2 iPhones, and it creates lab-grade 3D biomechanics, of your swing or of your throw, of your pitch, of your toss, of your kick. And so we started off with a large golf instruction company, then MLB teams, NBA, and then with a partnership with UEFA was an introduction to LAFC to see that if we cannot make a mobile, very simple, portable solution where practice happens, we can get the biomechanic feedback right there and then, whether it's in the gym or whether it's on the field. And so, with that matchup, Christian and the LAFC team, and that's sort of, working with the first team there, our first foray, actually, it is super exciting for us into soccer, professional soccer.
I think what Masa said is really, it nails it. It's that democratization that you can use technology to help anybody at any level if they just have a device. And if they've got connectivity and they can get to the network, his coaches can help people improve. And if they don't have access to, a professional coach that's their neighbor or something, I mean, think about how powerful that is, that if you have a dream, if you have a vision, if you want to be great at something, just use Moss's tech.
Yeah, and thinking about the implications from a talent development standpoint, knowing that for LAFC, certainly there's, you've got the club that's on the field at the elite level, but you're trying to develop a whole pipeline of talent, and these kind of tools that democratize and scale have to be really essential as part of that roadmap.
Oh, absolutely. You think about the academy and the youth players, and helping them develop with the use of technology is really a key component over the next few years.
Yeah, and I have to imagine, even thinking more broadly, you talk about these implications with things like scouting, with the, somebody who, that untapped potential that's out there of somebody who's, just needs some of that instruction. Certainly one of the things that we see when we talk about even big kind of plague problems like youth dropout. A lot of times it's just, I don't have access to good coaching. So, I think really exciting.
Or I would say access to even the visibility. So one of the things that jumps out at me on that is, it doesn't matter what level of income you come from. It doesn't matter where you're at in the country. You don't have to be in Los Angeles with, the kind of income that allows you the kind of exposure. You just have to have the talent, the drive, and the desire. And if you can show up on one of these apps, coaches are all around the country are going to love that. That's the democratization that levels the playing field, so that sports, that's so exciting for everybody to enjoy, sports becomes something that if you're interested and you've got the drive, you're in the game. You can participate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think through the pandemic, it's really accelerated a movement, just like we are with office life. They did a poll recently of employers. It was on the news last night, where it was really shocking. I mean, over 50% of employers are now, they listen to their employees and said they're going to go actually 100% remote or a hybrid approach. And we're seeing this in the academy space for youth sports, as well as some of the other organizations we work with. And what I think the pandemic has shown is that it's accelerated a trend to digital. And so if you don't have a digital play kind of in your playbook, it'll become a bit of a lost opportunity, and it's trending the wrong way. So definitely, to your point, Brian, like no longer do you need to look for a fielding coach or a hitting coach, let's say, or a pitching coach who's in a 2 or 1 mile radius from you. It's borderless, and the technology and the connectivity, really enables that you can work with the world's best or the nation's best.
It strikes me as you guys talk about this. I remember reading, I think it was a Wall Street Journal article a few years ago, and it was talking about player development in the NBA, I think specifically as a result of YouTube, right? Like, so kind of what you're talking about, where it wasn't necessarily one-to-one personalized coaching, but hey, if suddenly I can study every one of Kobe's plays over a long 2-decade career, how much more access do I than Kobe coming up, who was watching MJ VHS tapes, And so then you start to think about this next level and how we suddenly make all of that much more personal with data. Now, the flip side, and I want to get your perspective on this, Kim, because you've got a background as an athlete, a coach. It's great to have all of this data. We can now gather with things that used to take a big clunky sensor 3 years later can be a camera and an iPhone. But what do we do with all that data? How does a coach, an athlete, make that useful when you're kind of suddenly just beset with a whole bunch of data points that may or may not necessarily have the context to be valuable?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of the question that we always ask is, we can collect anything now, nearly, but what do we do with it, and how do you make it interpretable, not only for an athlete, but for a coach to work with an athlete and understand that data? Too much data is a problem, right? And we always talk about that, but what is it, and how do we communicate that data? How do we visualize it to make it important? So.
And I know maybe you want to expand a little bit about what you guys are building with BreakAway. Obviously, company's newer and had a lot of fanfare as you launched right after the Dodgers had just won a World Series, and it's part of a partnership working there with the Dodgers. Talk a little bit more about kind of what you guys have set out to build with BreakAway.
Yeah, so that's exactly it, is really taking that data, making it interpretable, and then making it look cool. And I think that's really the part for the athletes these days is it's something that they can share with their friends on Instagram, or probably not even Instagram anymore, but
TikTok.
But what is it exactly? So can we make it a digital asset, and can we make it something exciting for them to understand, but then also have the information in there that they can work with their coaches and they get the feedback of, this is really what for me, based on data, I need to work on. So you guys talk about kind of some mobility products that you're working on. If I'm a soccer player, what is my hip internal rotation? Is that a problem for me? Yes, okay, I need to work on that as I'm going forward.
I think one of the things that really is important, what Kim is saying, is the generation today is going to view the world based on how they've grown up and how they see the world. The truth is, they see it through a device. They see it through a little black rectangle. And the work and the effort that Kim's team is doing, I think, is so impressive, because it will give kids something not only to gamify against their friends, maybe they're competing on who's improving the best, but they're actually getting better from something they trust. They trust those devices, and if you've got good information coming out of it, they'll believe it, they'll respond to it, they'll get better themselves, they'll work harder. They won't need that human coach standing over the top of them, yelling at them, berating them, you gotta go faster down the field. They can see the GPS data, or they can see right on the field, right?
Yep, and it's almost some of, like what you were talking about, it's almost some of that gamification of it is, can we turn it into something that gets them excited to continue to improve? So.
Yeah, I remember talking to Dave Anderson from your team about borrowing some of the language of things like Madden, right? And that's what's so interesting about this, is this kind of collision of how we understand data sometimes may have originated from a video game, but to your point, hey, look, what easier way to make that relatable than to leverage the way that people, the way that people understand it. I still remember, I'm old enough to remember, was it Wes Welker who ran along the goal line like a classic Madden move to stall out the clock? It was like the ultimate, but clearly it just sort of, we're past that point.
We learned
now.
it from somewhere, right?
We learned it from somewhere, and now it kind of becomes a part of, okay, well, how do we bring that meaning and understanding? One of the other aspects as we talk about bringing meaning and understanding and looking at a lot of this data, part of it is I think, it seems as though, how do we make it useful in closer to real time or when it matters most, right? And so how much of that is the blend of kind of gathering data but being able to process it and make it useful in the moment?
I think that's a big thing for us, and I think with the hopes of being able to process data faster, bigger quantities of data faster as well with some of these things we're talking about at Verizon, with 5G and edge computing, does that help push our industry as well to get faster, to get closer to real time? Now, we don't necessarily need real time, but different things like we talked about player tracking. And player tracking, could you take that to a field and implement load monitoring? Hey, your player is super tired, let's pull them out. So can we use that technology and kind of push where those companies are at and get them a little bit closer to
I think that's one of the things, too, that we're working on at Verizon is we say, near real time or real time, because if a coach is going to trust something technical versus their instinct. I mean, a lot of coaches have been successful over a lot of years off instinct and maybe another coach giving them some input. But if they can get some technical data that's a visual of either the replay with some statistics tied to it, or to your point, referencing, hey, this player's gotten pick and rolled 3 or 4 times, or they're just slowing down on the field, it's hard to argue with facts and real science. And so I think that makes a big difference. It makes a big difference for coaches. It changes the way they view the game too.
Yeah, how is that shift as far as, it feels as though certainly 5-10 years ago there was probably more resistance, more sort of old guard coaches. Is that starting to fall away pretty quickly, or is there still a fair amount of friction as far as guys who are used to doing it? Instinct, play it by gut,
I think you have more of a mix of both now. So we still have older players that might not trust that data, but we have newer players that are coming up, younger players that, like Brian said, they live on their phone, right? And that's what they trust. And so now you kind of have a mix of those old school guys. And as younger players or younger coaches are coming through, they're having to adapt and take on that data. And I think it's less head coaches, more position-specific coaches that can take that data, really translate it to the athletes. And that's who's coming up. And then you'll probably see them transition to other head coach positions as well.
And on that thread about data, one thing that, for example, we've been really focused on is utilizing AI to better prescribe and personalize the experience for those athletes. We're very fortunate to work with a lot of the professional, coaches or elite coaches, but we know, just like in life, there's sort of a bell curve, and which is fine because you have coaches out there who may be at a different, not a professional level, who are more maybe general coaches. And there's, I think, 2 points to that. One is that they bring accountability, having a live coach. So for our platform called Uplift Coach, where you're actually live, think of it like as a power 10x supercharged Zoom. Like you can do instant feedback powered by data. But what we're also learning is that with this AI instruction, a lot of the intuitive coaches, they know how to instruct. Because they've done it for years, or they're really top of their game. But then, as part of that democratization, we hear so much about like AI replacing the coach, like having an AI coach in your pocket, AI trainer in your pocket. And for course movements, and Kim, you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there could be something there. But when it really comes to like that 1 degree difference or those more nuanced movements, having a live coach who can give you that accountability and keep you, on task, powered by AI. So then somebody who may not be as high on the professional game, they can use that AI data to better infer and better instruct. And so that's one of the things we're really looking forward to, pushing out in the next coming months.
The coaches, I don't think, are being replaced. Like you said, we need those coaches to make that translation. But using the data is that layer that's the addition.
I'm with Kim. I don't think the machines are going to rise up anytime soon and take over for the coaches. But I do believe that there is a space for both. I think that there's a lot of I have an entire AI team in my department, and we have actually interpreted an entire game and then responded back with the video to the coach within 1 second when the play is over. And so imagine this, you're watching a game, you're a coach, or you have somebody on the, some tech on the bench with an assistant coach, and they're watching that and they keep seeing what's happening as to why they're winning or losing, and they're getting that information within 1 second. So I think that artificial intelligence has a real place in the future of sports. And even when live coaching isn't available, you got an athlete that's the other side of the world or wanting to work at 3 a.m. because that's their circadian rhythm, right? So they can go use that AI, and then later on they could talk to a live coach who can interpret and tell them if that was good or not for them. But I'm not worried about the machines rising up and taking over altogether.
I think the other cool part that you talked about is the individualization of the data, and using the AI for that is because, especially at the professional level, I like to say that the athlete is an N of one. Everyone is a unique individual, especially at that level. But as you get into those lower levels, those kids are developing at different rates in different ways, and so being able to individualize that as well is really interesting.
As you guys think about the impact of this, and we, you look at, you watch a pro game, you see performances that feel light years ahead of where they were just 10 years ago. How much further can the elite athlete go when you think about these kind of technologies unlocking the next wave of performance? Is it more that sort of the average athlete getting better? Is that where we're going to see more gains? Is it more extending careers? I mean, where does this have the greatest impact as far as athletic?
I mean, I think you see right now with the extension of careers, Phil Mickelson just won at 50, right? You have gymnasts now that are in their 30s that are competing. And so I think that might be one area where it's really interesting.
Yeah. I think, and certainly thinking about how those things can change at the youth level, like we were talking about, how this longer term and how much more gains in performance, or even if we just think about if we keep the average kid playing for another year or 2 years, what is that sort of aggregate impact from kind of?
Did you want to jump in, Monta?
Yeah. I think that, like, to your point about Phil Mickelson at 50, and he has access to, and most professional athletes have access to, an army of, I think, different types of coaches and trainers. You have a strength and training coach. You might have, in his case, a swing coach. You may have a nutritionist. You might have a sleep scientist. Right? It keeps going. Naomi Osaka helped highlight the need for mental health and really the awareness around that. Of course, with timing of Mental Health Month as well. And so many of these athletes do have an army of folks. And I think another part that's really interesting, if we kind of see where the proverbial puck is going, is how do you then democratize that? So any youth athlete has that ability and the connectivity to all these different types of professionals, but at the youth level, to really keep them focused, keep them engaged and motivated, and of course, improving their athletic performance while mitigating injuries.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to pile on too, that is sometimes you see, or you'll hear kids that have a gap year in sports due to injury, or people don't have access to all the necessary medical facilities or doctors that they need for how to come out of an injury. And I think there's an AI element, there's probably a remote coaching element, maybe some remote medical capability elements. But if kids understand that injury is a part of the game, and they could learn how to prevent it if they change their biomechanics, you're talking about that skeletal interpretation, but also how to then come out of it and the timing. And if they're getting coaching that, hey, you're not expected to just start swinging the way you were before or running as fast, but here's the normal recovery period for the pros, here it is for the collegiate level, here it is for your age level. And if we build all those models into it, kids will trust that and they'll be able to come out of injury and they'll get back in the sport again. And so then injury doesn't become a plague or something that limits somebody's future. To your point, they go longer.
Another thing that looking at the evolution that you guys made during and moving quickly and kind of building out that platform, and it strikes me, one example from the pro sports world was the Dodgers running, BMAC actually, running Zoom workouts in that sort of pandemic. And I just say it, I frame it to you, Christian, around, strikes me there's a fan engagement angle to a lot of this. There is certainly the talent development side, but then there's this sort of how you can, as these things scale, use performance as a connection to a fan base, an average fan who may just want to be in better shape and learn from Carlos Vela or another, superstar.
Yeah, it's interesting, listening to this conversation. So for me, the way I look at it, when you think about the next generation of athletes across all sports coming up now, I think over the next 10 years, you're going to start to see specific platforms come about. Artificial intelligence will play a big role in it. In fact, I think it will be a force multiplier for the ecosystem in coaching today across all sports. And then when you start to layer on, like you just said, the consumer side of this, how does that play into it? So the way we look at it is you think about, player performance as one component, and so you've got an audience for that. But then when you start to think about something as simple as sports betting, micro betting, these types of things that are going to be in-app experiences over time, but player performance will factor into that in a big way, right, over the next 10 years. Even though it's not legal in California yet, we're still looking at it because we want to understand the dynamics of sports betting and micro betting specifically in a venue.
Yeah.
And then, when you start looking at what that platform could be, all of a sudden, augmented reality plays into that as well, right? Because we've talked about this in the ability to actually place a bet using a mobile device, this rectangle we're talking about, and getting an overlay of data based on the performance of a player at a particular, part of the pitch. So a good example is one of our players that go to take a free kick. You can actually see how they've performed in free kicks from that exact spot on the pitch historically, and then you can kind of inform your bet. Those are the types of things you look at, and then you think about sport books and how that could factor into this. Like it's a huge opportunity, and it really does all come down to gamification of player performance analytics.
I think let me jump in, Kyle. So I think one of the big things is if we think about the fans, it's very personal. So if you really think about how big of a deal pro sports are, collegiate sports, and even for parents, definitely at the high school level, it's very personal. And if they have that connectivity, if they have the ability to interact, if they have the ability to even, maybe place a wager or use their intuition that I think my favorite basketball or football or soccer or cricket, whatever player is going to do something, hey, I can hold my phone up and I can make a choice. I can gamble against that, or I could see how they perform. That type of connectivity, that type of 60, 70,000 fans all hitting on a network and wanting to experience it themselves, to interact, to see what's going on with players, it requires an awful lot of 5G connectivity. And I think that, in your facilities, you're going to see that demand come up, and you're going to see those technologies change the way people interact. Fan experience is going to be very different in person. For a long time, we were worried about people, they want to stay home and watch the TV. You're going to have to be in person to watch it. One thing we recently did, I'll tell you, Kyle, is at a hockey game, we had, you could hold up your phone and you could track and see one player. You just tapped on it, and then you would see that trail. And being able to see statistics about what's going on with that player, how fast they're going, and then having that visual so you could follow it around easier. Hey, that's personal. That's my favorite player. I want to check that out. Yeah, it was very cool. It's never been done before, but you can't do that we without the 5G and the edge compute. We tried doing it with the old school way, and it lagged. I mean, it was glitchy, and people wander off.
Yeah, well, and you touched on AR, and obviously we've spent a lot of time over the last few years speculating about that timeline to bring some of those consumer solutions to market. But, it's one thing to be doing this during a game and holding it up and living through that square. A whole other thing when suddenly that's a layer I can be flipping on in a pair of glasses, and it just becomes that much more native to how I'm going to experience sports in the future.
Yeah, and the other thing that we look at, so it's not all about betting, right? So you think about the future of broadcast, it's the same thing. So you've got to have this no to low latency network, right, really for it to work, and you guys experience that. So for us, we're looking at, this multiple screen dynamic, whether it's in venue or out of venue. Like the traditional broadcast of today, we're used to it. You got like 3 camera angles and Bob's your uncle kind of thing, that's it.
Yeah.
But we're looking at what does the future of broadcast look like? Do you have the ability to look at the perspective of any given player, whether it's on the pitch, a baseball diamond, whatever it is? And we're starting to look at that. We're working with a couple of partners to potentially solve for an opportunity down the road where you could literally, Brian, be sitting in your living room and say, this is cool, but I want to see what Tom Brady's looking at, those types of things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the focus of the future, right? Because that's kind of where the market's going. It will be a multi-device setup too, right? It's not going to just be your television in your living room. Even in the venue, it could be a mobile device, headset. There's a lot of things coming on the market, as we know, that customers are going to want to use.
You're playing right into what we've been doing. Last Super Bowl and in the previous season with the NFL, we had something called Super Venue. And you were able to fire up your phone, and you could get 7 different angles. I mean, you could tap on the screen and switch to the hero view, the big one. You could turn sideways and get even bigger. But you could control seeing 7 different angles, just exactly what you're talking about. We're not on players yet. There's no helmet cam yet. But the fact that we're giving fans that type of choice where it's not just only you're beholden to the broadcaster, and then we also give you replayability right on your device. And so truthfully, if you want to challenge what just happened on the field and you want to see it different than maybe the ref did, you can pick those different angles and check it out. Form your own opinion. All of a sudden, now you're in the game. Now you're a ref. I mean, technically you're not probably the ref, but you're certainly allowed to experience it so much differently now. And you can't do that with all that amazing, you have to have that 5G in there and all that bandwidth capability and that low latency, because the other thing is you can't be behind in the game. If you're in the venue, it has to be happening in real time at the same time it's happening on the field, or else it's kind of distracting.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That all connects to kind of what we talked about before of pushing our industry forward as well on the performance side, is that if you have this data and you're pushing for fans to get your free kick example of all the data layered on top, can we also take that to coaches? And so we're looking to you guys in the fan engagement space to really push our industry forward as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had hit on, Christian, I think as we were talking about this, some of the economics of this. And obviously from a player standpoint, having your players play their best, you're paying high salary, you want these guys to be good, but ultimately recognizing that a lot of those big business gains and the motive, like where we recognize returns on these investments, it has to go beyond just that player performance angle. Otherwise, this happens a lot more slowly. It's building out that bigger business case, correct?
Yeah, agreed. And it's not just, so our focus, it's not necessarily on LAFC, it's broader impact. Like we're looking at sport globally, and it's not just players. I mean, it could be horses. It could be anything, right? You have to think through it like holistically.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thinking a little bit about some of the work that you guys are doing and talking a bit about sort of how we increase, Masa, the speed, the computing power, and I've been so impressed watching you guys kind of continue to get that form factor down. But where do you see those next gains unlocking for you as far as product evolving, and I think specifically as it relates to fan experience, as it relates to bringing those kind of insights in real time, whether it's in a AR in-stadium environment, whether it's broadcast where suddenly we can understand better, whether it's injuries, whether it's why that ball traveled 450 feet off Cody Bellinger's bat, all of those fun things. How is that continuing to, as the technology infrastructure gets stronger, how is that influencing your product roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for Uplift Coach, our live remote training platform, even though we see some use cases where there's a one-to-one personal training element, in the use space, we're seeing a lot where you have one coach and you might have up to 15. We can actually even have more, but we purposely kind of recommend 12 or 15 youth athletes across the screen just because of the bidirectional nature. And that's bidirectional is the key word here, because with 5G, what we're really looking forward to is that so many other kids are training in their backyards, right? They're training on the field, and they're on currently maybe LTE, or some of them might be starting to get on 5G. So you're definitely seeing higher, and faster uploads and download speeds. We're also witnessing better video quality, and that's super important, right? Because they might be on an iPhone or an Android phone. The coach is usually on an iPad to get that bigger screen real estate, but having that crisper view and having that, for example, we have a tool that is called Live Replay. So automatically the coach can just look and replay, let's say, a corner kick. And you can just show the athlete immediately what they just did. And then you can do voiceover, you can use annotation. We have a 3D AR overlay as well. And that makes it like super relevant for that individual athlete because they're getting corrected for them on the fly. How many times have we been on Zoom calls where, the images freeze or you get the, moment, right? And so, again, and that's on Wi-Fi, right? But I think the more and more people are encouraged to play outdoors or in their backyards, it's no longer this, but we don't have Wi-Fi, I'm worried about the connectivity. 5G unlocks that. Super cool. Just one more thing I wanted to touch upon, something you mentioned, actually a conversation thread. So biometrics is also very interesting. At the moment, we have an Apple Watch integration where we can monitor heart rate. So one of the things that we see some coaches do is they love to get the kids all warmed up. And there's a little bit of competition, right, of course, among the kids. So for those who have the Apple Watch, you can track their heart rate. So when they're dropping digital box jumping boxes and they're doing those jumps, you can see their heart rates climb. And we're seeing at that professional level as well. Whoop did a partnership with the PGA. And so, that's one of the things, I don't know how many of us are glued on Sundays, the final day, right, and the 4 days of these tournaments, but you're like, I wonder what Phil Mickelson's heart rate is on the 18th hole, right? Like, we now know. We have the ability to peer in. A little creepy, but kind of cool as well.
You could bet on it.
And or analyze and pore over that data, and exactly.
What is his heart rate? Let's bet.
Well, and that hits on, I mean, the generational shift, right? That the older athlete who's more guarded about those things, been taught to be guarded, maybe had contract negotiations where they go, this might put me at risk, versus it seems like that younger generational shift is really coming.
The contract said no heart rate monitoring.
Yeah, I remember, hockey is one where, they tried to make a big push, and, a lot of hockey players didn't necessarily want to be monitored, particularly during off hours, right? I want my free time, I want my separation, but again, younger generations,
and I think
changes come.
There is the interest from players that maybe they don't want their team tracking it, but they still want to know as well. So can we individually know about our data? And so it is important to them regardless.
And I think, so the interesting inflection point that I'm sure you guys are seeing is a few years ago when these were sensors and wearables, there was a little, consent and data looked different. I think that's one of the really interesting challenges now is, hey, if cameras and a visual analysis of a broadcast are going to generate some of these insights.
How's it different than a video?
Not a lot that you can do about that. Well, switching gears a little bit, I'm curious to talk about, we talk about performance and the speed of sport. There's certainly the athletic performance side, but there's the sort of fan performance angle. And we'll talk a little bit about both media, but Christian, curious. You talked about it up front, getting fans back into stadiums, and you guys here in Southern California, obviously that's happening a little bit more slowly due to local legislation, but obviously been a lot of work that you've been doing over the last year to get those people back into stadiums. Talk a bit about some of the work that's been done with that lens on sort of the technologies that you guys, in a lot of cases, had already fortunately been putting in place and done a lot of work over the years, I think, to be very more ready than some might be in this moment.
That's a very nice thing to say. Thank you. It's interesting. So by our next home match, June 19th, so I think this airs before that.
This is still, it's still next, yeah.
We'll be at 100% capacity. So we're really excited about that.
Bravo.
We don't know if there's a mask mandate. I guess we'll find out pretty soon. But for us, most of what you're seeing in the marketplace today, contactless payments, ticketing, we opened with that, right? Bank of California Stadium, we opened it in April of 2018, and so we had already kind of forged ahead with a lot of those innovations. So a lot of what we had been doing just kind of aligned, like in this whole pandemic operational flow, luckily, right? That if there had to be a silver lining, that was potentially it. But what we've learned as we've been able to reopen this season is, we were hyper-focused on mobile ordering, for example, concessions. And what we've realized is it performs, but it's not performing in a way that we thought. We thought everybody would focus on mobile ordering, right? The customer. And at the end of the day, the customer just wants to belly up and buy a beer. Like, they want to get back to where their life was pre-pandemic, right? And we've surveyed customers, so we kind of understand their headspace. So the idea that it was going to, because, in 2020, we did a ton of planning. We were working through, thermal scanning and mass detection and all these technologies at gates. Which we're not doing any of that because, with COVID, just because you take your temperature doesn't mean that you're not symptomatic, like, the science behind it. So there's a lot of innovations that we worked through that we ended up not pursuing. And then you think about like contactless ticketing was something we were already doing. Now you have a lot of venues working on it, which is really important. And then contactless payments also key. We had always had this idea that we wanted to be cashless. Then the state said, you will be cashless. And so now we are cashless, and we haven't had any hiccups with that at all.
Nice.
Luckily, which has been a good thing. And then, so we're still working on, the iteration of concessions, point of sale. There's a lot of things we're working around biometrics. So facial recognition ticketing is a pilot that we worked on back in 2019 with a couple of partners. We launched it in 2020, got 2 matches into the season, and then, of course, we had to shut down. So we'll pick that back up probably in 22. And then we're also working on biometric age verification and payment at concessions. So you can literally walk up and we identify you in a system, you buy your beer, off you go kind of thing. We're working on a couple of use cases there. So the idea is you could belly up to a concession stand, do that. We're also looking at some self-service models as well. So we're working through all these things now. At the end of the day, it's all about eliminating friction for customers, right? We want them to get in and out as fast as possible. We don't want them to have to stand in line too long, to order concessions or even merchandise. And so, we're working on that. And then there's some other innovations around, delivery to suites. One of the things we're looking at is robots, for example, to deliver either food and beverage or merchandise or both, we'll see, to suite holders, right? Makes perfect sense. Not necessarily a good use case on the concourse or trying to deliver something to a seat, but there are specific areas of focus there. So we're just
how much do you have to tip the robot?
You don't have to tip the robot.
Have you seen the ones in Santa Monica rolling out?
Yeah.
Oh, right, exactly.
And West Hollywood. So it's a very practical use case, but we're trying to figure out how do you blend that into the guest experience at our venue, and then hopefully
That's really wild.
with partners like Verizon, we can figure these types of things out and then scale them, right, across all of sports and live entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things I would tell you, Kyle, is during the pandemic, we made hay while the sun was shining. We now have over 60 venues with ultra wideband, where it's professional sports and as well as concert venues and places where people can come in and do things like what Christian's talking about. You need to have that kind of speed, capacity, and that kind of bandwidth that responds super quick. We call it low latency. We're going to continue to blow that out and continue to build. But COVID was good for allowing us to get in and get a lot done, I would say, because there's nobody in your stadium.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it seems like providing some of that impetus to make changes, like going cashless, like going, without physical tickets that we've talked about for a while. There's been some friction, some resistance, and this kind of provides some of the unlock, it feels like, to kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just saw the big announcement. One of the major sports leagues just said we're going ticketless, paperless, I should say.
Yeah.
Everything's on your phone across the whole league. And I don't think they would have been able to do that without people's paradigm shifting due to COVID.
100%. Yeah, a lot of teams were really risk averse on digital tickets, and we actually fielded a lot of questions, inquiries over the last few years pre-pandemic, just about safe ticks,
how to go
and digital ticketing and even facial recognition ticketing. People just thought, well, you guys are like the man on the moon. Like, why would we want to do any of that? And now the pandemic's kind of shown that these are very viable solutions, and customers are kind of moving in that direction. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we're at. And it's no different than contactless payment, right? You think about, the Apple Pay, Google Pays of the world. They were starting to get market penetration pre-pandemic, but then the pandemic hit, and then all of a sudden, at least in LA County, if you wanted to go to a restaurant, there is no menu. You got a QR code or an NFC tag. You tap it, and then you're paying on your mobile device, right? And so customers had this new learned behavior that didn't exist before. And so now that's actually starting to, get a lot of traction in the market. And not just in sports, just across, all industries.
No, I agree with you. I think the convenience of it, the learning that's happened, it's going to change how you go in and out of a venue. I think it'll be faster. I think it'll be easier. There'll be more trust, more confidence. If I want to transfer a ticket to Kim, I think that's super easy versus having to hand her a piece of paper. I mean, think about how analog that is, how old school that is. So I think the fan experience just gets better because they feel it's more automated, more secure, and more private.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a sort of change moment in terms of trying to introduce these new things in big, crowded, real-time environments on a live game day where I just want to get there. And it's one thing I'm interested, I don't know if I've ever asked you before, but you guys do experiment and try a lot of things more than the average club.
All day long.
All day, constantly. I rarely call you up with an idea that you're not either already trying or interested in potentially trying. What are some of the lessons, though, for others watching who are, trying to experiment on the same level? And I'd throw that to, you do a ton of work with clubs as well, but things to encourage when we talk about a future where there's going to need to be a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of new possibilities, and we don't know whether or not some of them are going to take off or if they're the exact right way that people want to do something in the future. How do you guys think about experimentation in this?
Well, so with LAFC, it's not unique, but it is a little different in professional sports because the team owns the stadium, right? So we kind of just do what we do. We make decisions on the fly sometimes, like, yeah, let's try that. Why wouldn't we do that? And so for us, there's specific products that are in the market today that we've worked on. We've helped partners develop things. We won't name names, but we've helped them get to a point where their tech is scalable, right? And it just makes sense to other venues, other teams. And then you take something as simple as going back to ticketing real quick. So one of the biggest challenges that you have with digital tickets is when you have a family of like 5 people coming in, and somebody's got to have all the tickets on their phone and they got to stand there at the turnstile and click each one, right? So not a great experience.
As your kids run off and you're
and trying to get through the gate. And so now we're actually going to release it here. Hopefully, I'm not going to put any pressure on certain people, but if they're watching this, they'll know. So by June 19th, we hope that we are going to have the ability to tear up to 10 tickets on one device, right? So you basically scan your phone one time. On the screen, it's going to pop up. How many tickets do you want to tear? You tell it. If you have 5, you can do all 5. If you have 5 and you need to send one to somebody that's parking the car, you can do that. But then it just lets 5 people in, right? And so it's simple. It took a minute to get it done, but it's little things like that will make the use case of digital tickets even more compelling to the end customer. So those are the types of things that we work on.
It strikes me there's this dare I say, sort of paradigm shift happening in sports where, hearing the type of things that you're doing, and really it kind of relates to everybody here because, Brian, your team, the team here at Verizon 5G Lab, working with startups hand in hand to shape a lot of these things. Masa, you've been on calls where we've talked about product roadmaps and ways that Verizon might be part of accelerating that future. And meanwhile, you're over here talking about helping early stage and mature, enterprise technology companies to evolve. There's really this sort of spirit of co-collaboration now more. You've been in this industry for a long time. Now it feels like more than we've had in the past. Am I wrong? Or,
No, you're spot on. We can't be successful without the LAFCs or either of these two, innovative companies that are here with us, with Kim and Masa, because we have a lot of assets. I want to go back to your earlier question. What's the lesson learned? The lesson learned is jump in, start innovating, start getting your fans connected. Because if there's a slow roll of getting tech into a stadium, what you're saying is we want our fans to experience friction. Whether it's ripping 5 tickets at once or all one at a time. I mean, it's you've got to lean in and be more innovative. And it sounds like what Christian has going is awesome. Some of the bigger sports leagues have a little bit of a slower adoption out of fear and fear of their fans not being happy and then social media blowing up over something. But the truth is, trying and innovating and partnering. We can't do at Verizon what we're doing here in this sports lab, this 5G sports lab. We're not really sports people, right? We're connectivity people, and we're edge compute people, and we're great about networks, but we can't do sports without partners. So I think to really answer your question, it's we're living in a new world where no one can stand on their own. I don't think as much as in the olden days. You had your product and you stood there and people liked you and they used it. And if you're gonna have to start vertically integrating, you're gonna have to start stacking things on top of things to make the experience much richer for the fan. And fans will respond if it's easy. You can get in, tear all 5 tickets and get in. They're gonna love it. They're gonna come back. If they can't, it's a pain in the butt. The smallest thing that will criticize from what you did, people like, let's go somewhere else. Yeah.
No, it's a true statement. I mean, look, it's something. So going back to turnstiles for a second, it's a very exciting topic for me.
That's amazing because I find it boring.
Yeah. So NFC's been a focal point for us. And then, so it's something as simple as we changed our turnstiles for the season, right? And now the reader has an NFC target on the top, and we still scan a barcode at the bottom, where before everything was one unit, and people used to get so confused, right? They would sit there and phones, trying to figure, all the time. And so we got bashed on that quite a bit from our surveys. So we changed it. But it's little things like that. If you pay attention to it, you pay attention to the customer, you just make them that much happier, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very anecdotal, but it's just the reality.
Mm-hmm. As all of this rolls out, you talked about all the work that your team has been doing and laying all of this literally foundational kind of new infrastructure. Where are we in some of that rollout process when we talk about mobile edge compute, we talk about 5G and these advances? Where, use a sports metaphor, what quarter, what inning would you say we're in some of that rollout?
I would say the couple of the bigger sports leagues in the industry, we're very close to completing the NFL, where we'll have ultra-wideband across the board on all of them. At the end of this year, we'll be complete with the NBA as well. The NHL is another one. We're almost complete with that. They're in their playoff season. By the time they come back, we should have all of those completed. A couple friction points here and there where we work with third parties, and we'll get through those. But it's not just sports. It's also just venues where there's concerts or where there's plays, or it's not just you watching a person who's out playing a sport. It could be a singer, an entertainer who's I don't want to say juggling, but something on stage where people want to interact with that, and a circus or you name it. So I mentioned earlier 60, we're going to continue a very aggressive pace of deploying that because it's one of those stories that you hear famously, if you build it, they will come. Well, we build it and then they show up. So it's awesome what we're getting done.
You know, one thing that strikes me that as we talk about this rollout, one area we haven't necessarily hit on, I do just want to kind of briefly touch on because a lot of us involved in different ways, but that blend of sports entertainment and esports. And thinking about some of the implications there, I just want to talk a bit about, I think both esports and certainly some things that, you know, we as RGA worked on with Verizon and others around Fortnite and the Super Bowl last year. And I guess I couch it all in this sort of colliding worlds of physical and digital as it relates to sports, be it esports, be it ways that we might experience more traditional sports virtually. How much is that part of what you guys are working on? You guys have done some work around maybe performance in the esports space, but how much does esports become a bigger part of the overall sports experience in a world where that connectivity is more immersive? Do we feel like that's part of where this goes?
Let me jump in on that. So just right over here, we have our 5G Gaming Center as part of this 5G Sports Lab. And the gamers are people that get what we do with latency probably more than anybody else. And if you're a gamer and you've ever heard the term, I lagged out, that's what the kids will say. They demand, and for them, success is extremely low latency. So you see a lot of efforts from Verizon trying to bring that type of connectivity and that type of edge computing to them because they get it immediately and they benefit from it. So whether that's on a computer at home or it's on a mobile device, huge implications there. But then what about the broadcast? So think about people watching on Twitch. There's a lot of people that enjoy watching gamers, hearing their commentary and that experience. And so we have broadcast booths over here where people can come in and game, and then over 5G, they're connecting and they're putting out their game experience and their commentary on it in real time, and it's very low latency. So I would just say, from a gaming standpoint, there's so much opportunity because these were people that were ahead of us in the game, if you will, when it comes to connectivity and the importance of that.
Yeah, and certainly from one of the things that you guys did over the last year in a partnership with Fortnite and gaming as a key fan engagement platform, not to mention your EMLS club. So it seems as though there's a continued trend towards more collision in the LAFC world and the soccer world between kind of the digital and kind of physical and gaming side.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they'll live in parallel, right? There might be, there is some crossover. EMLS is a good example of that. Our skins in Fortnite, obviously a good example of it.
I'm still wearing mine when I dip in and get killed by my daughter and others.
When you lagged out?
Yeah, when I lag out. I blame lagging out. It's the lag out, yeah.
It's just lag.
The 5G's not as good in my area. That must be it, sure.
Send some screenshots. But yeah, for us, so that will always live in parallel. There's some cross-pollination there. But esports is a big deal for LAFC as an organization. We're looking at things specifically at our facility that would have let us do some really interesting things. We did Fortnite's Pro-Am back in 2018 in our stadium, which was a lot of fun. It was Ninja and Marshmallow.
Oh, no kidding.
Going head to head. That was exciting.
Yeah, so see, he brings in pros in the gaming world and mixes that with his pro physical sports world. We did the same thing at the Super Bowl last year. We had one of the largest Fortnite maps ever built on 5G. They built it quickly on 5G, and then we brought in pro gamers with pro football players and had them playing on that map. And I mean, the amount of excitement when you're mixing the real world with the virtual world and pros that play in virtual versus the physical pros and bringing that all together. I mean, they eat that stuff up. That is, we love virtual things. We love living in virtual worlds. And so I think from an esports standpoint, you're going to continue to see physical and E come together.
Absolutely.
And then you're going to continue to need lots of network and lots of connectivity.
No, I mean, it strikes me we're sitting on a virtual stage,
right?
Yeah, like immersed in a potentially immersive virtual environment.
Wait, you gave it away. We're actually not physically here.
We're all in the
San Francisco studio.
This is a hologram.
Yes.
But I think, this blend that you talk about, the physical and the digital, is super interesting. I mean, and I'm sure, Kim, you must be seeing this as well, but when we deal with some of the youth athletes, some of the features that these guys love are any kind of gamification. So that's kind of the two worlds starting to collide a little bit. Mm-hmm. And when you drop these type of AR tools, whether it's I call it kind of whack-a-mole, but the classic like agility drills, and then you put a timer in there, you put a scorecard in there. They're fierce, right? But what they're also not realizing is, hey, this is actually getting you all more relaxed and nimble. So then when you actually start your practice, you're kind of warmed up. And there must be so many different cues that we can learn from like e-games or generally the software game market that we can be applied in the physical training world. And I think that's super interesting. The opportunities that exist there.
Yeah, the esports athletes, when they play in a team, there are 5 of them, right? And they're playing in a digital world. But a basketball team is a 5-person team, and they're collaborating as well. And so we see it as they're just another type of athlete, maybe more on the cognitive side, right? So really, these different cognitive tools that they're using are also used in sports. But can we learn more from them, because that's more purely what they're doing? And the other part about the data and with them is that you have every single move, every single click that happened. And so how can you use that to really inform what's happening in the game as well?
Always mining that data, aren't you?
Yep. So it comes back, and it's just a different type of athlete, and they're really human in the base of it. So we can do a lot of similar things from the performance side.
Yeah, I think going back real quickly on the performance side, because it was something you guys had mentioned before we started, but I think we talk so much about performance in this sort of like ripped muscles kind of like, athletic performance ad, but that cognitive angle and the potential for gains there with a lot of this technology. And then that sort of collaborative, I think you said, the collaborative nature of it, right? That sports isn't just about each individual being better. It is about how do the individuals work better together. And that might be one of the most overlooked and exciting parts of, I think, a lot of this from an athletic standpoint.
That's the chess match, in all honesty, is if you start bringing together, hyper athleticism or hyper cognitivism, and then you blend those with somebody who's the coach or the chess player trying to bring it all together, you mine some data, you start giving them some feedback, like, hey, this would probably work better if you approach it this way because this person has this skill set and this person has this skill set, and then pretty soon, you're demanding the kind of compute where you talk about ripped muscle performance. We have entire teams at Verizon. That's honestly one of our biggest strengths is our performance of our network, and we have entire teams. That's all they do is focus on performance. We should probably mine some of their data and see what these guys are doing. But they're constantly focusing on micro improvements of how fast radio is and how fast the core is, and just how fast we can get our network to respond. It's a bragging right for us. In the olden days, you might have known it as fewer dropped calls. Right, but nowadays it's how fast that data goes out and comes back.
Yeah,
that brings together the piece of all the different who's on your team and all the different components. I think one of the biggest pieces of this is in scouting and recruiting, that sort of thing, is how do you understand who should be on your team based on their data. So the stuff that Moss is doing is that it can go out to everyone and we can help coach them, but can we also take that and understand what that athlete is, and do they belong with what we're trying to build on our team as well?
Yeah, so building more communities based on fit. So think about an athlete who has a certain gait when they run, or an athlete that has a certain femur size that's best for a strength that's needed in a sport. Coaches get that deep into it, and if they can find those through these coaching opportunities all over the U.S. or at a certain state where they're trying to attract talent for. You might have a D2 school. They can't really pay for the attraction of talent all over because they can't scout all over, but if they can virtually, makes a big difference. A big difference.
Yeah, again, you get into those things that feel as though they reached a significant inflection point through the last year plus, reevaluating, do we want to have as many people on the road? There's new risks. How can technology play a role in getting to stronger assessments more than a guy with a GoPro capturing, 7 innings or a match of somebody, traveling around. So, no, I think this is all really exciting. Looking at the potential performance gains, I do, and everything that we've talked about here today. I do want to close by looking ahead a little bit and kind of talking to all of you guys about the future and a lot of these things and kind of playing out a bit of where things go. I want to start with you, Christian. Near term, you've got some exciting things on the immediate horizon. You've got an all-star game coming to town in a couple of months, I believe.
Summer.
TBD exact date.
We actually announced next Wednesday.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned, but summertime, we've got the all-star game rescheduled and coming to town.
Yep.
And it sounds like a full audience in attendance. And then you've got a new tenant/roommate
partner,
moving in. Yeah,
Angel City Football Club. Super excited to have them.
What else can you give us in terms of previews of what's to come stadium-wise? I know there's a very small tip of an iceberg with lots of things I can't talk about. But
we've got some cool stuff coming. That's all I can tease. But it'll be exciting. Customers will love it. We're trying to eliminate friction, as I said, which is a buzzword, eliminating friction. You heard it here first. But we're working through that. But there's some other things around, autonomous retail that we're working on in and out of the venue. It's not just in stadium. We're trying to use technology as a force multiplier for LAFC from a branding perspective as well, right? So throughout Los Angeles, there's some things that we're trying to do, and maybe we can get some of that done for All-Star. We'll see. But exciting times.
Yeah, really exciting. Kim, looking at you guys with BreakAway, it's a new company. You're developing fast, building a client base and the product itself. Where do things go from here for you, and what you see in terms of having been in the industry and where you sort of see things going with a lot of the technology that we're talking about here today?
Yeah, I think we'll get maybe not more data, but kind of help get that data sorted, get it to customers and clients a little bit quicker in a turnaround time. But really, I think it's about telling those stories. So what is that story that you're telling with information, and can we make those more engaging so that we can use the tools that we have to get there faster?
And then similarly for you, Moss, as your product continues to evolve, as the space continues to evolve, how do you see Uplift continuing to grow and change, and how do you see some of this, again, kind of similarly, how we make sense of visual data and how that's going to change athletics over time?
Yeah, so our product roadmap ahead, how many millions of DocuSign NDAs can we get out on this feed now?
You've got to opt in now and sign out, yeah.
So put it this way, I think on a macroscopic level, it's, this year and a half has been, and you all alluded and talked about it, whenever there was a culture of risk or hesitancy, a lot of folks and organizations may have been forced, to digitize or to think of data, or whether it's contactless ticketing, et cetera. And now that things are quote unquote going back to normal, I hope that this momentum of evolution from a mindset cultural perspective can continue. And so that's kind of maybe a different theme, but wondering, how do we keep that DNA going? Because I think in the end, employees or fans or users, benefit. And all I can kind of say about a roadmap is that we're all about, and I think we've all touched upon it, is it's about the user experience. And sometimes AI can play an incredible role, but sometimes just pure video, and that video not having latency, right? Not getting hung or dropped, or and the beautiful picture quality. If we can beam 1080, 1080p level with 15 or 20 athletes working together with a coach across the world, those are kind of the vision things that on the product side that make our hearts sing, right? What gets us excited. So, I think that and some other things that maybe we touched upon during the conversation are some of the things that hopefully people can look forward to seeing in our product and user experience.
Let me just pile on quick for Masa, so he hears this. You need to know that our Super Venue app, it has 7 feeds of 1080p. And that's 35 meg per second per phone. And in the Super Bowl at Raymond James Stadium, our network didn't even blink. And thousands of users had that up and going. So think about that. Thousands of users all getting not 1, but 7 streams of 1080p at over 35 meg per second. And they were enjoying the game off of that. So that's the power of 5G. When you say powered by 5G, that's the type of thing we can do. So let's hook it up. We're going to deliver what you want right there on that 1080p stream. Yeah.
We got the deals and things happening right here. I love it. Well, as we close, Brian, I think one thing I actually kind of want to open up to the group. We're sitting here in Los Angeles where essentially every single sporting event imaginable in the world is going to be coming over the next just 6 or so years, starting, hopefully we've got some NBA playoffs going further, TBD by the time this is airing. But we've got a Super Bowl in February, and then over 6 years we'll have everything leading to the Olympics in 2028. I'd love your perspective on, some of the things that where we're going to be in the Super Bowl in a year or less than a year, and how this evolves, how some of the things that we'll see by the time we get to the Olympics, how far things might come in that time, and any part of it, any use cases, any things that you see that we're going to look predictions on what we might look back and go, wow, God, that who would have thought how? Yeah.
So I think good question. I think I'll give you some perspective. In my roles at Verizon, I've hosted quite a few Super Bowls, and we're a big sponsor of the NFL. And we have these command centers, and we put a couple hundred people in there, and then we have people in the stadium. And what's interesting is each year the usage keeps going up. I used to think that at some point people would enjoy the game. They're spending $4,000 or $5,000 for that ticket, and the reality is at the Super Bowl, they spend a lot of time on their devices. A couple years back, another interesting factoid for you here is usage tipped. So it used to be download, and then we started seeing more upload. And what that means is what you're talking about, is people want to show or say, hey, look what I'm experiencing. So you'll see people taking lots of pictures and then they're uploading to the cloud. You'll see people doing video chatting over their video chat capabilities, or just shooting video and then transmitting that. And so what happens is fans, they can't believe they're there, right? It's so exciting, or maybe they saw something. But I think what's different is today it's manual. In the future, you're going to experience augmented reality. We have something called Holomoji, where you can experience some cool play and then put your favorite player into it and then put yourself up on the Jumbotron. There's all sorts of things you can do. You can share that on social media. Well, imagine being able to be in a game where we're pushing things to you based on your likes, what you want to participate in. You're tracking a player. Maybe you felt confident. You're really attached to what this player did the last 3 weeks, so you know they're going to do something. You place a bet, for example. Or you want to be able to broadcast to lots of people, and you want to be able to do it with a cool, augmented fashion. I think that's what's going to change. And I think that you're going to need incredibly powerful networks to be able to broadcast all that information. And I think going to a game will be so much more attractive than sitting at home and letting a broadcaster feed you one distribution of video. That's what I think. I think you can not only experience multiple video distributions, you can create some of your own, and I think that the experience will be so much richer, you won't not want to go there. You're going to want to go to be in person versus the challenge that some of these venue providers have had in the past.
And then I think about, from a fan experience, we talk about some of that sort of data side, and thinking about, you're going to have, it's 2028, it's the Olympics, you're going to have a generation of athletes who have come up with years worth of analysis of their motion and all of this kind of backlog.
Yeah,
you've got a score that you've maybe had from the time a kid was elite in junior high school, AAU, high school, following them all the way up. How much, does that become core to the story of how we understand that next generation of athlete? It feels like,
Well, that's the Olympics. The Olympics is about the stories of the individuals, right? So does that play into that?
Yeah, how that...
Yeah, well, I think if the gamification continues to evolve the way we think it will, pretty soon you'll have, maybe there's some type of trend or score you guys, patent and put out there, and it becomes the, how is this person's insert whatever you want, but look how for 5 years they've been doing and performing at this level, and we expect to see this today. Do you want to bet on it? Right, type thing. So, yeah. I mean, I think that there's just so much more data available, and there's going to be so much more that broadcasters will have about stories, about trends, about the things that they've, this person grew up by a pack of wolves. I'm kidding, but augmented reality, right? Or they were dealing with artificial intelligence for years, and they didn't really use humans as much, and that's what resonated with them, and so they grew differently. I think sports between the Paralympics, the Olympics, the NCAA tournaments that are coming here, the Super Bowls that are coming here, World Cup is coming to Los Angeles. There's going to be so much explosive athletic opportunity to mine the data, to learn from them, to have them demonstrate how they became athletes. And there's so much tech involved in it. I think that's what's going to change.
And the global part's so exciting to think about. Some of those countries, the areas that we're going to see that are going to make outsized gains, right? That are going to be the ones that maybe lean in more to some of these gains, and use them to offset, hey, we're a smaller country, maybe don't have the same resources or the same coaching, So it's thinking about, will there be that country who comes in and does really well in the medal count where did these guys come from? Maybe that's part of the Olympic story. Exactly. Well, I'm curious to close with you, Christian, as somebody here in LA and driving a lot of this. And so I'm imagining 2028. I'm think safe to assume I'm never needing a ticket as I'm going to all of those Olympic events, right? I'm just showing up, and I mean, I need some sort of ability to get in, but I'm not ever taking out any sort of phone to get into these events, to pay for things at these events. I'm not driving around LA. It's basically just I'm having like the beautiful frictionless Olympics all around LA, right?
We hope hover cars, maybe. I don't know. I was promised that as a kid. I'm still waiting.
Elon's almost done tunneling underneath the city, right? I think we're almost there. Well, again, I want to thank all of our panelists today for this discussion. It's been really exciting to look at this future and imagine some of these things that we're going to be seeing play out over the next few years, and a number of things that we probably haven't even thought of or talked about today that are going to be, as these tools roll out, all of these new possibilities, and be it put in the hands of Kim, Masa, or any number of other innovators, startups, teams, leagues. So again, want to thank everybody. Brian, want to thank you for joining.
Thanks you guys for coming.
And Masa, thank you for making the trip down, or in these early days of business trips. I appreciate you being able
First business trip.
Be here on stage and not have to use the hologram machine to bring you here. Kim, thank you as well for being here. And Christian, as always, great to see you now in the flesh. And for everybody watching, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to, this is the first of more to come from the Global Sports Venture Studio and the Verizon 5G Sports Center. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.
All righty, thanks.